from agriculture. This commits that 75% of farmers in England will be engaged in low carbon practices by 2030, rising to 85% by 2035. And it shouldn't, and it isn't just a push by government. It isn't just a regulatory or financial incentives from government. It is about working with other organizations. I was talking to a dairy farmer the other day. I said, where are you on moving your business net zero? And he said, I'm way ahead of you. In fact, if I want to continue to sell my milk to my buyer, they are requiring that I am net zero by 2032, which is 8 years before the NFU have committed farming to be. So we are very much in partnership with others. We can't do it on our own. And it's those sorts of relationships that really are going to make this happen. Together, the environmental land management schemes are intended to provide a powerful vehicle for achieving the goals of the 25-year environment plan and our commitment to net zero emissions by 2050, whilst supporting our rural economy. And it is crucially about getting that balance right. We'll also increase investment in industry-led research and development through finding solutions to help deliver net zero in agriculture and horticulture, including through the Farming Innovation Programme. So what are our schemes? The schemes' expected outcomes are that they will play an essential part in halting the decline in species. This is a legal commitment under our Environment Act, and it reflects the fact there is a crisis of species decline in this country. We have one of the most nature depleted landscapes, and we want to see farmland birds, insects cease to decline, and that graph start going in the right direction by 2030. We want to bring 60% of England's agricultural soil under sustainable management by 2030. We want to restore 300,000 hectares of wildlife habitat and bring over half of our SSSIs into favourable condition by 2042. We want to maintain our target levels of woodland creation and restoration to 2030 and beyond, together with restoring and maintaining up to 200,000 hectares of peatland in England by 2050. We want to anticipate that the collective actions of farmers under our ELMs scheme agreements, together with the Farming Innovation Fund and our other farming offers, will decarbonize agricultural emissions by up to a total of 6 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per annum in carbon budget 6. That's the 2033 to 2037 in England. And to achieve our targets for cleaner water, including reaching or exceeding objectives for rivers, lakes, coastal and groundwaters that are specially protected, whether for biodiversity, bathing use, or for drinking water, as per our river basin management plans, which many of you will be familiar with. We are also keen to link this to our animal welfare standards, and we recently announced our animal health and welfare pathway, which will encourage and support the gradual and continual improvement of farm animal health and welfare. And we do this by supporting farmers to transition to higher welfare practices and systems, and encouraging sustainable food production founded on high welfare farming. And we are improving biosecurity, which will help manage endemic disease risk and further support our goal to eradicate bovine TB by 2038. And we're tackling antimicrobial resistance as set out in the UK 5-year action plan for AMR. And we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions from livestock through tackling diseases and improving productivity, which are all part of achieving the net zero strategy in the 25-year environment plan. So just to conclude, how will ELMs help deliver the goals of the 25-year environment plan? These schemes bring environmental benefits by reducing carbon emissions, helping to create and preserve our habitats, allowing us to make landscape scale environmental changes, which will be crucial steps towards achieving the 25-year environment plan ambitions and our carbon net zero goals. We're committed to trebling woodland creation in England by the end of this Parliament. We will support agroforestry, wood pasture, and hedgerows. We're increasing metrics now on how valuable hedgerows can be in locking up carbon and how well that fits in with a productive farming landscape. We maintain a range of ways for farmers to get involved in woodland creation and their maintenance. It's crucial that not only just planting trees, we've got trees that will prosper and work for both carbon, biodiversity, landscape, people, access, and all the rest of it. We want to see our intended levels of uptake for our new ELM schemes work, and then we will maintain our levels of woodland creation and restoration to 2030 and beyond, together with restoring and maintaining up to 200,000 hectares of peatland in England by 2050. So the three schemes, sustainable farming incentive, local nature recovery, and landscape recovery. We want to see as many people as we can, farmers as we can, getting into a sustainable farming incentive. We see local nature recovery as a great follow-on from countryside stewardship, and schemes will be able to migrate easily between the two. And then landscape recovery projects are for large landscape change projects, which will be really fascinating to see how that develops. That's a very quick run through of what we're trying to achieve. What's really important is that you get the chance to ask questions, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Richard, for that overview. Very kind, and fantastic to see you back in government. I'm going to open up with a question, then I've got a number of questions that have come in the chat box. What we do with the All Party Group, obviously, is turn to MPs and peers to be able to ask their questions. If you're able to raise your hand, if you would like to ask a question yourself, that would really help me as chair. And then I've got a couple of questions that have been asked by associate members, and then we'll bring in some other associate members. My opening question, Rich, was around obviously the three pillars. Obviously, we've got the sustainable farming initiative now essentially well underway. How can you ensure that local nature recovery and landscape recovery get that sort of equal treatment to make sure that it's balanced? These aren't seen as sort of subsequent things. And then also when it comes to landscape recovery, what work can be further done to incentivize smaller farms to be able to look at sort of local landscape recovery schemes? You mentioned them being sort of large schemes, helping large landowners, but obviously if we're going to try to achieve emissions reductions, everyone's got to get involved. So keen to see where you think we could go further, given the plan that's been set, and what potential future innovation there is within it.
So thank you. Just dealing with that last point first. We've guaranteed similar amounts to be spent in supporting farmers as was existed at the beginning of this Parliament under with a basic payment, the area payment scheme. And the question is, how do we slice and dice that to satisfy our direction, and how do we make sure that it is that we're, can't find a better word than democratizing it, so it is not just all going to large landowners and big NGOs, it's actually going to farmers. And that's where I think it's really crucial that we don't just look at this as the only way of supporting farmers. And another part of my role here at DEFRA is about green finance, and to make sure that that the trillions of dollars of ESG money is getting through to farmers of all shapes and sizes. And that's where clusters have become such a successful and vital way of delivering these kind of projects, because it allows farmers, however small they are, to work with their neighbours across a landscape, across a catchment, and with our facilitation funding, to have the necessary capacity to be able to deliver on these schemes. We think there are a lot of ecological benefits that can be delivered within a farmed landscape. So we're not necessarily talking about these things in terms of large net style rewilding projects, although there's a place for that in large parts of our landscapes. But what we crucially want to achieve is ecological farming within the farmed environment, and that's where the first two schemes come through. So soils, improving our soils. I mean, I went to agricultural college in my 20s, and I was never taught about soils, about functioning soil systems in terms of how they are. I was taught that they were that it was just basically a medium for which you could apply synthetic inputs to grow crops. And it was all about production. And because area aid is so unfair, it has, half of BPS goes to 10% of farmers, and they're the biggest farmers. We want to make sure that we're getting it to the smaller farmers, that they are able to come forward and look at a menu of things that they might want to do. And one of those is making sure those soil systems are functioning ecologically. Currently, a large number of farmers, and that's increased by around 30,000, I think, are now in countryside stewardship. And we want those schemes to be able to migrate into local nature recovery, which is a high level of support of ecological benefits. And we're obviously really concentrating at the moment on making the sustainable farming incentive work, and that the vast majority of farmers will find that they can go into it, that there's a reason to do it. And the pilots, we had 2,000 people apply for pilots out of 84,000 farmers. And we've run really good test and trials on that. We've been running test and trials on the other schemes. And, I'm not going to pretend they're not problems along the way, but this is an iterative process. This is not a sort of cliff edge where, go straight from one. You can migrate and you can work out from your farming system, perhaps working with your neighbors in a cluster of farmers about what kind of things you want to do and what benefits that they will bring, while still feeding a hungry world. Thank you.
Caroline Lucas has a hand up, has asked a question in the chat box, and then we'll go to Sherilyn McCroy afterwards. And then I've got a couple of questions that are pouring into the chat box. So Caroline, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks, Lord Benyon. That was really helpful. You just said that there isn't a cliff edge, but I just wanted to relay some experiences from farmers in my constituency who said that they do feel that it's a bit of a cliff edge in the sense that the direct payments are being removed, but there isn't enough detail yet about the SFI. And in particular, they said that there were only details of 3 of the 10 standards that are going to be part of the SFI. So my first question was, how soon can we expect a full set of standards to be published at all stages? And secondly, given the level of inflation, what consideration has been given to uprating grants and subsidies and so forth in line with inflation?
Okay, so on information about the sustainable farming incentive, we have refined and improved the approach so that farmers in your constituency and elsewhere will be able to do it themselves. This is crucial. They won't have to pay a land agent to do it. And the criticism of countryside stewardship and other grant schemes in the past, that they've come with a wedge of pages and pages of stuff. Much of it is not relevant to them, and this is really simple. Secondly, the standards are being rolled out as quickly as we can. There are a whole range of different ways in which we are working with the farmers to make sure they're aware of them. There's a lot to be seen on the gov.uk website. We're running regular webinars. We are having presence at shows and agriculture shows. We are working with agencies such as the NFU, but also groups who advise farmers to make sure that they are understanding that we're trying to keep this simple, iterative, and that it can be changed as and when we incur concerns from the farming community. In terms of more money, we've got a commitment up to the end of this Parliament, which is obviously 2024, and then after that, the parties will produce their packages for their manifestos, and I'm very much hoping that we can continue to be seen to, because every major agricultural economy, the major advanced economy in the Western world, supports farmers. What we have to do is play our part in changing the $500 billion global farm subsidies to make sure that we are transferring those to sustainable farming systems and systems that encourage farmers to work with nature. And that's really what this is about. And your other point was, Caroline, remind me.
Those were the 2 points. I just wanted to press you on how soon we might see those other standards come forward, because my farmers are really anxious and excited about making the transition, but they need more information. And I appreciate we have a financial settlement that was agreed up until the next election or whatever, but circumstances have changed as they have across the board. And it just feels like farmers are really struggling just now.
Well, I'll talk to Janet Hughes, who leads our future farming team, and I'll get her or Victoria will write to you with specific details about when they can know more, because I don't know specific dates of rollouts of parts of it. But I've received inspiration that there are more coming over this summer, and by the end of this year, it will be clear what the entire SFI package is.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to hand over to Sherilyn now, and then in terms of the questions that have come in, I will read out some of the questions in the chat box after Sherilyn's done her comment. And I might take a couple together, Richard, if that's all right with you, because we've got quite a diverse range, and I'm keen to get them all in.
I'll be quick. I'll be as quick as I can. It sort of follows on from Caroline's point, really, in that when I spoke to my farmers a couple of weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, they were exasperated. Their costs were just becoming astronomical, and I think the ask was what assessment DEFRA is making on the value of ELMs, how much money they're actually getting to ensure that the farms are getting enough money, so it's a true reflection of the cost of delivery, and ensuring that the farm actually gets a fair return on what they're having to do this year, next year. So are there discussions happening with the Treasury, and also what assessment is DEFRA making as a department on how they're coping? Thanks.
All the time, Sharon, yeah, absolutely. And reflecting the short-term issues that have come out of Russia, Ukraine, and that has had an impact on, in one sense, positive, that wheat prices have rocketed to all-time highs, but so have inputs. And it's not just the cost of fertilizer, which peaked at somewhere just under £1,000 a tonne, is now pulled back to about £650 a tonne, but still incredibly high. And farmers are having to make a very difficult judgment about whether they are going to drill in this autumn to the degree that they would normally do, bearing the price. So they're taking a bit of a punt on will the high wheat price, cereal price be maintained, and that may justify them purchasing fertilizer this quantity or not. Will they actually reduce their levels of inputs, and to see if they can do this? So we're talking with farmers, we're talking with the Treasury, we're talking with others. And one thing we've done, which I hope your farmers will really appreciate, is bring forward by 6 months 50% of the basic payment scheme, which farming is all about cash and cash flow, and being able to manage that cash flow. And I think that will make a big difference in terms of their short-term problems. The longer-term issue, and what brings us back to what sits behind this, is the desperate need to ensure some degree of being able to cope with the increasing volatility in global markets, because Ukraine, we all hope, will abate. And that, will not be less of an issue in the future. But what we have to find is systems, and I think there's some really interesting work being done about this in government and outside it, about supporting farmers with a scheme that cushions the peaks and troughs of farming, which impacts on their cash, which impacts on how they can run their business and pay their rent or whatever it is. So I think there's further conversations to be had with parliamentarians about this, because you're meeting with your NFU and your other farming representatives, and it's really useful to hear what they're saying.
Oh, thank you. I didn't realise actually, Helen Morgan. Helen, you've got a question. Would you like to come in as a member of Parliament also to raise the point you put in the chat?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for organising this session. It's been really useful. I suppose my question really is, having spoken to some of my local farmers, they have picked up on an issue that's perhaps happening more in Wales than it is in Shropshire, but certainly concern over it, where large corporations buy up sort of large tracts of land essentially and use them for planting non-native trees. And they're concerned that that's going to become a model whereby large corporations can obtain the SFI payments and sort of salve their consciences by offsetting carbon emissions, but actually productive land is being taken out of food production. And I just wondered if there's any detail in this scheme whereby food production is balanced with this need to restore the natural environment.
Helen, thank you for that. I mean, Caroline was at a meeting where we discussed this yesterday. It is an emerging problem, less so in England, more so in Wales and in Scotland, but it is something we're very concerned about. It's actually not as relevant to ELMs. It's much more about private sector green finance and the wrong incentives being given. And in some cases, borderline, well, in some cases, greenwash. And it comes under the heading of ESG money, environmental social governance, and it may be in certain circumstances quite environmental, because they're planting native broadleaf or whatever, and that can have an environmental benefit, but it's not very S. And we want to make sure that green finance is delivered in a way that is socially acceptable, and also is something that is delivering additionality. And there has been cases where some corporations have found it able to buy a valley, buy a farm, and say that there is X numbers of tons of carbon locked up on that farm, and that allows them to carry on, with polluting. To me, green finance, first of all, a corporation should reduce as much as it can its emissions through good management. It can then offset what it can't, going onto a stable, well-regulated credits market platform, which can deliver benefits both within the farmed environment. So the farmer can be, by changing what they do and doing certain things in corners of fields and cleaning up water and doing all these other public goods, can prove a degree of additionality which is properly understood. And the shareholders of that organization, your constituents and everyone, can go onto a clearly transparent means to see whether that is right and proper. What is wrong is where I think in Wales I heard of one company that bought 4 farms around a village, kicked off all the farmers. The impact of this socially on a community is unacceptable, and that's why the S in ESG needs to be properly regulated. And we are trying to, through our green taxonomy, through the work we're doing with the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures and other means, to regulate that marketplace in a much better way. But please give me examples, because it really helps my arguments.
Okay, thank you. And I would just echo Caroline's point about needing the standards sooner rather than later, so that there's some certainty for planning forward for our farmers.
Thanks. Thank you. So I've got 2 livestock related questions I'm going to pair up, Richard. So Megan Scott has asked that 40% of UK arable cropland is used to produce grain for animal feed. Given escalating food costs and concern about food security resilience, do you think that there's a case for banning grains for animal feed in order to free up more UK land to produce crops, not only for human consumption, but also to help tackle deforestation? And secondly, Christopher Price has also asked, when it comes to livestock, that in Section 1 of the Agriculture Act, government committed to providing financial assistance for conserving native livestock, native equines or genetic resources relating to any such animal, and asks, where has the government got on this?
Thank you. So what we want to achieve is continued stock farming. Is really important, and in fact it can have massive benefits in terms of carbon. If you have a mixed farm and you're using stock in the right way, and that we're encouraging people to eat locally produced, sustainably farmed meat rather than it being shipped from feedlots in Arizona, then that is working well towards our net zero ambitions. So we are developing through ELMs support for regenerative farming, which uses a mixed farming concept, and that we hope will continue to work towards to the benefit of farmers, but also to the benefit of wider society. Regenerative farming is a real has got a real head of steam at the moment. There's huge interest in it, and right through sort of lockdown, and I was on webinars listening to people like Gabe Brown that does this event every year in Hertfordshire called Groundswell, which I'm going to, which shows a real optimism in terms of delivering a better farmed landscape, where stock have a role to play both in reducing emissions, but also in feeding people healthily. Under the Christopher raises the question about native breeds. I really would love to see this. I mean, when you go to France, you know what region you're in by the type of cattle and sheep you're seeing in the fields around you, and we want to do this as part of a sustainable farming system. But I can't say that there is a specific standard that it relates to native breeds, and that there are commitments, as he says in the Agriculture Act, and I'm sure he and the Rare Breeds Trust will continue to keep government's feet to the fire on this.
Thank you, Richard. Two questions relating now to tree plantation and sort of wider opportunities for carbon sinks. So Emily Hunter asks that it's great to hear about the support in ELM for woodland creation, and that this includes agroforestry and wood pasture. Protecting existing trees, however, is important. Will ELM include support for the protection and restoration of ancient woodland, as well as ancient and veteran trees? And sort of, I'm trying to sort of crowbar this in. Joe Tetlow asks, how do you see ELMs, essentially taxpayer paying for environmental outcomes and public good, interacting with carbon offsetting, i.e. your organisations paying for tree planting and other negative emissions technologies? Sort of related, but I guess in terms of that wider strategy around tree planting, and then how we can potentially build further partnerships around it to make it part of the net zero agenda.
Trees are so fundamental to what we're trying to do, and this afternoon we've got every minister is coming to an event where we're going to just be really drilling down on our England tree strategy, where we are on our targets, what the barriers to that is, because Rebecca Power does nature recovery. There's trees are part of that. I do green finance. I do national parks and designated landscapes, and I do diseases. So trees come into my life a lot. Victoria Prentice is trying to get more people to plant trees as part of ELMs. Joe Churchill is doing climate change adaptation trees, and Zach Goldsmith is our trees minister. So we're all going to meet together and have a long-awaited, really deep dive into how this is working, and where the problems are, and where the threats are. And that you touched on the quality of our existing woodland, and I'm quite clear that we could knock our 30 by 30 commitment out of the park if we included some of our ancient semi-natural woodland, which are extremely rare and special environments. But we do have a large part of our woodland in the UK which is undermanaged or poorly managed, and actually not achieving much for biodiversity, not achieving much for carbon. And if there were incentives to bring that back into management, you've got more understory, you've got more, it's not just a monoculture, then the benefits of this are enormous. And at the moment, from new plantations, I worry that there's an issue of farmers are nervous about this, because it's a commitment that you can't reverse. You can plant a wildflower meadow, and then if suddenly there's a grow for Britain in 30 or 40 years time, you can change that. One hopes that you wouldn't, but once it's in trees, it's always in trees. So you've got to give a farmer an incentive, not just for the cost of planting it, not just for the cost of protecting it, but also for giving them some security, financial security for the medium to long term. And there's a final thing is that all of these millions of trees we're planting will be utterly pointless in doing it if we can't tackle, first of all, keeping diseases like Xylella out of this country, which will devastate our woodland. Absolutely horrendous what's happening in Southern Europe at the moment. Entire landscapes destroyed. Secondly, that pests such as deer and squirrels are dealt with. Grey squirrel, there will be no mature trees that are being planted today of any value unless we can deal with grey squirrels. And when I raise this, people slightly think I'm being flippant, or they roll their eyes because they've been feeding grey squirrels in the park. But this is a horrendous pest that will not allow us to achieve what we need to achieve from a landscape, from an environmental perspective, from a carbon, and from a biodiversity perspective. So that's one of the things that we're really working hard on.
Thank you very much. I'm going to, again, pair up a couple of questions. So Barnaby Cooper, I think from the Wildlife Trust, has asked, transitioning towards a nature positive and climate neutral farming sector will require an overhaul of the current widespread and unnecessary use of pesticides in agriculture. And despite this, we've seen a delay in the publication of the National Action Plan for the Sustainable Use of Pesticides and delayed support for integrated pest management in ELM, while we've also seen highly toxic neonicotinoid chemicals authorised for use in farming for the first time since 2017. So how is the government working to ensure that a movement towards more sustainable pesticide use is integrated within the agricultural transition? And then David Walsh also sort of asks, and I think this is, it relates also to the pesticides and waste management. Nitrogen waste in our agricultural system amounts to more than £2 billion a year, half of all agricultural profits, which drives air pollution, water pollution, and is obviously a potential greenhouse gas. But it's regulated in a piecemeal fashion. So would the government also consider setting a target to halve nitrogen waste by 2030 by publishing a nitrogen budget, and set out steps to achieve reduction by adding a new nitrogen chapter to the 25-year environment plan when it's reviewed at the end of this year? And you may want to add, Richard, about sort of this review on the environment plan, if there's any other additional areas where you think there might be movement.
Thank you. Yes, the integrated pest management is the way forward, and that is a standard within our sustainable farming incentive, the first sort of entry-level scheme that we want every farmer to go in. So that is very much there. We have banned neonicotinoids. We did give a derogation for a very specific use on sugar beet, because there was a threat that sugar beet production could be absolutely decimated because of flea beetle. And if in those circumstances, we would end up having to import more sugar from areas where there are not our standards of production. And there was a risk that one of the 4 sugar beet factories could close if this was deemed to be continuing year on year. But I'm not sure it actually hit the threshold where they've had to use them. So that is the reason that was done. And that was on a plant that wouldn't flower, so it wouldn't affect bees, and you wouldn't be allowed to plant a flowering crop on that land for, I think, 2.5 years after they'd used it. So there were quite strict controls around it. On nitrogen waste, I think that's a very important one. I mean, the best way of reducing nitrogen waste is, of course, the financial incentive at the moment. I mean, it's not something that the government wants to engineer, but farmers are being very careful about what nitrogen they're using. Now, with a field margin conditions as part of environmental schemes, they are limited at the amount of nitrogen they can put on the edge of fields, and good practice is driving this further forward. But also, the soils standard, the water standard, and various other things that we are introducing will bear down on use of nitrogen. And of course, the really difficult conundrum for governments is about air quality. But there's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm talking to someone who's just done a carbon audit of my own farm, and it is undoubtedly the farming practices where you are putting using synthetic fertilizers that is increasing, that is resulting in a large proportion of my farm emissions. And so in order to get to where I need to get, which is net zero as a farming business, I need to be finding alternatives. And that is why we are supporting farmers to grow herbal lays, and deep-rooted nitrogen-fixing plants as part of the process, which will allow farmers to use less synthetic fertilizers and nitrogen.
Coming to our end of our session, sadly, and there's too many questions to get through. So Richard, I hope you don't mind. One solution might be that I get my team to sort of take some of the unanswered questions and send them in as a letter from the all-party group. And if we're able to get a formal response from the department, we can share that around all our membership, if that's okay. I just wanted to end on one final sort of practical question that's come from Alice Russell, saying, thanks for organising a session. How can farmers successfully pitch for the pilot schemes you mentioned? And if there's greater interest and funding available, are there things farmers can be including in their applications to support the scheme? And do you have any detail about when the next schemes for the landscape recovery scheme pilots will be announced? Is the department looking for evidence on which areas would be best to focus on? So I thought I'd end on a sort of real-time, immediate practical question around this, and whether you can provide any detail.
So firstly, we will certainly reply to all the questions that if you or the Secretary could submit them, and in a way that we will reply in a way that you could then just circulate around everyone who's here. Getting more people into most of our testing trials are now up and running. Most of our pilots are on the SFI are running, but if people want to get into landscape recovery testing trials, that I'm sure can be that can be arranged, and they just need to contact DEFRA, and we will consider them. And that is a formal process, and they have to have a plan, and they have to. We have to feel that we're really testing all our systems, and crucially, please I hope people can convey this to farmers in their constituencies, that the criticisms in the past of the Rural Payments Agency, I think when I've now returned to the department, I found a completely different organisation, much more focused on farmers. It achieved 98.5% of payments now for this year. When I was last here, we were getting fined by the European Union for not delivering it. So this is an organisation which is absolutely crucial for delivering these schemes, because that is the practical way in which farmers receive their money, and it's crucial that farmers are interacting with them as well. So we will certainly continue to make, and maybe an opportunity in future that you could have me or Victoria and someone from the Rural Payments Agency and someone from Natural England who will be governing the rollout of the environmental element of these schemes on the call, and really focus on those issues which are of massive concern to farmers, but also to wider groups of NGOs and the like.
Richard, thank you so much. Just, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to just bring in one extra person, because due to a quirk of Zoom, Philip Dunn, MP, the chair of the EAC committee, was coming under the alias of Holly Rowden, and I didn't realise. So I just wonder whether, if you don't mind, Philip, maybe having the last word, if that's okay.
Well,
I'd just like to confirm that I'm not Holly Rowden. I hope that's not rude to her. I was just picking up a couple of points from the tail end of the discussion. My apologies for only joining halfway through, but on tree strategy, my committee is just in the final throes of producing a report Minister on sustainability of the built environment, and one of the things that came across to us loud and clear is that the UK is the second largest importer, or rather second most reliant on imports of timber for building materials, and there's a big push to get the construction industry to focus on sustainable building products. And in the tree strategy, it's absolutely essential that we don't purely go down a rewilding natural regeneration path, but we have to have commercial plantations, however unattractive they might be from a biodiversity perspective. And I'd be interested in your comments on that. And secondly, we've done a lot of work on water quality, as you're aware. One of the things that's very clear is that we need to ensure that agricultural runoffs make their contribution to reducing phosphate and nitrates in the waterways, as we've just been here, you've been discussing. But a part of that would seem to me to use the ELMs mechanism to ensure that farmers can also, in a coherent way, help to reduce their contribution to these kinds of pollutions of our waterways. So fencing of livestock to ensure that they're not drinking and crapping into the waterways is something that would seem to make sense.
Absolutely, Philip. So timber security is something that we are going to be discussing this afternoon, and it is really important that we are producing trees that have this table is locking up carbon. So you know the timber that we use in construction and other things is you know, it is a really valued source. And if we're not shipping it from abroad, because we're able to grow stuff that will grow to maturity and be used, it's really important. And so, yes, we need a variety of different species that will benefit in terms of carbon and biodiversity, but also the stuff that we can grow commercially. And that is why it's crucial that CONFOR and the forestry growing industry are buying into our plans. If this is something just the property of you know, of a few rich people and hedge funds, you know, in our buying up our uplands and planting them, then we're missing it out. This has got to be something that is sustainable, that has an income for people at the end of the day. We're also supporting farmers in a variety of different ways and trying to prevent pollution, slurry systems, farm investment schemes, so that farmers can get access cash to reduce the risk of pollution. And many of you will be aware of the big row going on around nutrient neutrality. We're working closely with Natural England to try and find a solution to this, because this is holding up a number of developments, particularly in the south and southeast. And we want to make sure that we have getting our standards of construction right. So we are limiting the ability of new housing developments, for example, to release nutrients into our water courses. And there are ways of offsetting what we can't, like wetlands and reed beds and various other different standards, which we are coming up with to tackle that very important issue. And you're aware of the Environment Act's drivers, which improved by yourself and other people down my end of the building to improve those standards. It's really important.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks so much for staying on the call and stepping in at the last moment. You've given a really eloquent responses to some of the quite difficult questions that have come your way. We look forward to working with you in the future. I just wanted to end by saying that the next event for the all-party group for members of Parliament will be next Tuesday, the 24th of May, in the Churchill Room, where we'll be hosting a reception with Lord Goldsmith on COP15, with speeches starting from 1 o'clock. And for anyone who's not sort of done so, please do follow the APPG online on Twitter @EnvironmentAPPG. We're keen to make sure we can promote what you do to help the environment, and we'll be reposting your tweets as well. So hopefully everyone can come together in a common cause as Environment APPG members. And I've been working with the Green Alliance team on an exciting programme for the rest of the summer and into the autumn. So look forward to seeing that shortly. But once again, Lord Benyon, thank you so much for your time today. Really much appreciated. And thanks for everyone for joining the call. Goodbye.